All right, hello everybody. Let me just get set up here. And then I make sure to have a little timer going because, boy, I sure can talk, I'll tell you that. All right, so hello, my name is Paul Leingang. I am the organizer, hey Chris. I'm the organizer for Lee Interfaith for Empowerment. That is the justice group that FMUCC is a member of. And so I was very honored to be asked to come and speak today and just share some of myself with you. It's very cathartic for me to be up here and speak. It hit me as I was walking through this door, and I've known this for a while. I don't even know if I've had this conversation with Reverend Jim about this, but this was one of the very first buildings I ever came to when I moved to Fort Myers. So I grew up in Louisiana. I moved to Minnesota. I lived in Minnesota for 5 years. I went to graduate school in Delaware. And then in 2020, in February of 2020, I moved down to Florida. So my background is in environmental work. I have a master's in marine biology, and before I was doing this, I was working for an environmental nonprofit down in Naples, doing environmental education, conservation. I was in charge of taking care of alligators and snakes and aquariums and birds, and teaching kids about mangroves and the importance of caring for our environment. And I had started to feel called to something more. I left research in graduate school because I felt like for what I was doing research on coral reefs, and the lack of knowledge really wasn't the big barrier for us. We know why the Florida coral reefs had 105-degree water temperatures this summer. The reason why we aren't acting on some of that isn't because we don't know what's happening. And so I wanted to get into education and conservation to start to do something more, and then Hurricane Ian hit. And as I said, I grew up in New Orleans, or I grew up in Louisiana, just outside New Orleans, and I was in high school when Katrina hit. And I remember not really fully understanding what was happening, but recognizing that what was happening wasn't right. And what was happening wasn't as it should be. I'll never forget, a year and a half after Katrina, I was volunteering with Habitat for Humanity, and the assignment that they put us on was to gut and help build homes that were destroyed in Katrina, a year and a half later. And Ian hit, and I was helping at this distribution site that people in the community just set up. It wasn't the government, it wasn't an organization, it was just some people came together and put a tent up at a church in Harlem Heights where people could come and drop off supplies, and I helped organize and redistribute them. And people would come and ask us, when is help coming? When are we going to get food, water, shelter? And they're asking me. And I had this moment, I said, I don't know. I'm not, I am just a guy. I don't know how to help you other than what I'm doing. And it brought me back to Katrina, when people were asking, when is help coming? When are we going to get help? And over the next few months, the same things happened here, where people couldn't get back into their homes, or insurance companies were not paying people out, or going completely bankrupt, or having to just move away and never come back. I know that there are people in every congregation who have just left and can't come back. And that moment at that distribution site, I felt compelled. I felt that, that call right in the center of my chest to do something more. And so I started looking for jobs, and I found this position for life on Indeed. And the question on the application, the first thing that on there said, what in your community makes you angry? And I was sitting on the couch with my computer on my lap, and I turned to my wife and I said, what do they want me to attach, like a thesis, or how in depth do they want me to go here? Because I could go. This was October of last year, and what I ended up talking about was environmental injustice, and how the communities that I was helping and that I saw being impacted by the hurricanes were people who were just abandoned for a lot of it. And that what brought me to life. I went through the process, and I got involved because I had lost hope. I'd lost a lot of hope that things could get better, that communities could improve, that people could come together. And after Ian, I saw people coming together. I saw communities coming together strong and helping each other, strangers who had never met doing things to help save the lives of people that just needed help. And I knew that I wanted to be a part of that. And the reason why I say coming in here is cathartic for me is because one of the things that makes me angry today is I have been sober for about 12 years now. And so when I moved to Fort Myers, I came here because there was a meeting that took place in the fellowship hall. And I came here for about maybe 2 months, and then COVID shut down everything, right? But it was in this meeting, in that fellowship hall, that I met people who are now my absolute best friends in the world. And so, this building really helped save my life because I was new. I didn't really know anybody, and I found my sense of community because this church gave those people a place to live or to meet. And what makes me angry today is that people like me, are dying all over the place because the resources aren't available. After the storm, especially, some of the facilities that we had got destroyed and haven't been rebuilt. And the thing that we hear over and over again is this idea that there's just no resources. There's not enough money. There's not enough we would love to help, but we just, there's only so much to go around. And what I love about life is that is the narrow of Pharaoh, or the narrative of Pharaoh. Pharaoh's narrative in the Bible tells us that we live in a world of scarcity, of fear, of individualism. And what the Bible tells us and what God tells us is that we actually live in a kingdom of abundance. This is a kingdom of infinite. Like, God promises infinite. And really, what Pharaoh is doing is telling us that we live in a world of scarcity so that the resource allocation doesn't have to be equitable. And in the book of Matthew, chapter 23, Jesus is scolding religious leaders of the day, right? He says, "Woe to you, scribes and Pharisees, you hypocrites! For you tithe mint, dill, and cumin, but neglect the weightier matters of the law, justice, mercy, and faith." And so when we think about justice, it is a requirement for God, right? Just as it is a requirement to come here on Sundays, to sing in the choir, to go to Bible studies, to do those things, like Jim said, to remind us to walk humbly with God, the faithfulness ministry, just as it is with mercy work, where we open our doors for people to come and have meetings. We help after hurricanes, after natural disasters. We reach our hands out to help people meet their immediate needs. right? We do mercy work. We do mercy and faithfulness pretty well. But when it comes to justice, biblically speaking, justice is holding the kings and the nobles accountable for the fair treatment of all God's people, right? It's all God's people, especially the orphan, the widow, and the poor. One of my favorite things is that in the Bible, the poor are never the problem, right? You never hear someone say in the Bible, like, well, that man, squandered all of his money, and so he's just bad. Or in the story of Nehemiah, those people, well, they knew the interests that they were agreeing to, right? You don't hear that in the Bible. You hear that Nehemiah got angry. And he got angry and turned that anger into action. And so we are called to do the work of justice so that we can hold our leaders accountable for the fair treatment of all God's people. So that when our leaders tell us, well, our children aren't reading at grade level, but we just don't have teachers, we reject that narrative. Or when they tell us that we would love to have more treatment centers for alcoholism and addiction, but we just don't have the money, we reject that narrative. And they tell us, well, we don't want to issue civil citations for youth because they need to be arrested. Like, we reject that narrative. That is not the kingdom that God promised. And so when I look around and I look at the kingdom, the world that I live in, and the community that I've become a part of here, and I see things like that makes me angry. And that's why I've been so proud to be a part of this organization, because we have rejected that narrative and made real, meaningful changes in people's lives. Most recently, we just had a victory at the Fort Myers City Council where they wanted to build high-rise condos where the old News Press site was. They wanted to put up 1,200, as the developer said, of the highest-end developments that you can have. And there was another developer who wanted to build a mixed-income housing development for low and moderate-income families with a rent fix for a minimum of 10 years. And the city council, I don't know, and so we stepped in and said that, the people in this community need somewhere to live. And when people don't have somewhere to live, that offends our sense of morals, that offends our sense of morality, because that is not the kingdom that we believe God promised. And so I'm really, oh my gosh, see, this is why I set a timer, right? I'm very grateful to be here today to speak with all of you, and I had lost a lot of hope, especially during COVID and after the hurricane, that things could get better. And what I have seen through the churches in this organization and the people who are involved in this organization coming together and pushing for real changes to our policies so that this kingdom can get back to that kingdom that God promised. And seeing that really helps me get that hope back, that we together we really can make a difference. And just like the story of Nehemiah, when we come together and harness our collective power, we can make change. And so, I feel like I'm about to start rambling. I tend to do that sometimes. And so I'll just leave you there and say thank you so much for having me, and really, really excited to be working with you. Thank you.
David just said, set your timer. Remember what Pastor said a few weeks ago. What does it mean when the minister puts a watch here? Absolutely nothing. I want to bring you back to that passage from Micah. What does the Lord require but to do justice and to love mercy and to walk humbly with God? Some of you have been around for a while, and you may remember about 8 years ago, we had a pastor tell a story to the congregation that really was the beginning of life, partnership, in this congregation. He told the story about a town, and I'm going to change the story a bit because this is the way I tell it, but it's a story of a town that was called Mercy. It was a wonderful village. If anyone ever was suffering, the people, the community would come together, like Paul was saying. And, you know, if you were sick, they would bring hot dishes. That's what we called them up north. They would bring in food. One teenager had a bike that was ruined when he fell over and messed it all up. And within a week, the community got together, they had bake sales, they raised money, and they bought a new bike for this kid. Whatever you needed, if you needed surgery and you couldn't afford it, they would have these amazing ways to raise money and to help the family in need. This town of Mercy was aptly named. It was a town that showed mercy. Charity was its slogan. Well, in this town, there was a beautiful river that would flow through the town. And every so often, especially when there was a big storm in the area, the river would swell up and things would start coming floating down. And one year, all of a sudden, people started floating down, hanging on to rafters or whatever they could hold to when they went by. And of course, the town of Mercy responded. They jumped out and pulled the people out of the water. They cleaned their wounds. They kept them warm and comfortable. They fed them. It was wonderful. But every time it rained, more and more people would keep coming down the river. And again, the people of the town would respond. And finally, one 10-year-old boy said, "Why do these people keep coming down the river?" And their eyes were opened. And they decided to send a delegation upriver to see what was causing this. See, charity, mercy wasn't enough. It was necessary, it was a proper response, but it wasn't enough. When they went upriver, they found that, these people were building their houses in the floodplain. And every time it rained, their houses got wiped out, and people would be damaged, they'd lost everything. And then after this cleared up, they would go back and they'd go to the city council and ask for a permit, and they would give them a permit to build a house back there again. And they said, "This isn't right." I don't know if they were angry, but they realized they had to do something about this. So they organized the people of that town to go to the building department, to go to the city council, and to change the rules. That's what life does. Charity is important, but justice is the other leg of this three-leg stool. To do justice, to love kindness, which is another word for charity in Scripture, and to walk humbly with God. Well, now when I told that story, I don't know if you want to raise your hand, but how many of you identified with the people who lived in Mercy? Did you think you were people who were living in Mercy? How many of you identified with the people upstream coming down? Actually, those who raised their hand, it was about 50-50. I thought most would think, well, we're the people in Mercy. We take care of each other. We're good people. But I want you a moment to think about being the people floating down the river. That's how life starts the year. Each year, we gather in groups in our congregations and listen to what makes people angry in our church, to what they're suffering. And we're going to start that process this month. We're doing it, and all the other congregations in life are doing it. We're having listening sessions, or what we call house meetings, to talk about not taking care of other people, to talk about where are we suffering? Where do each of us suffer? Like Paul was sharing his story about what made him angry when he couldn't find a place to meet or the services weren't there. So I'm going to invite all of you who want to participate in Life this year to begin with these listening sessions. There's one this Wednesday, there's one Friday, there's one a week from Saturday, and there's another one on the last Saturday of the month. There's information about those in your e-blast. You're all invited. We already have about 20 people who have signed up, and we hope to have even more. So, as we say in life, life for justice, justice for life. Life for justice, justice for life. Amen.